Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here to help you navigate, well, another complex week, looking at significant developments both here in the U.S. and internationally.
It certainly was a packed week, lots of moving parts.
Absolutely. Now, for the vast majority of Americans, perhaps for you listening, this past weekend probably felt, pretty standard for football games, maybe some World Series talk starting up, Halloween preparations.
The usual rhythm, yes. But running alongside that, beneath that surface, there were these very visible public demonstrations happening.
Right, across the country.
Exactly. And these events, well, they were framed very differently depending on who you were listening to. Organizers saw them as vital political resistance.
Well, administration critics often describe them as a necessary expression of constitutional rights.
And these protests were positioned directly against policies President Trump has championed.
Internationally, the administration emphasizes goals like peace, security, prosperity, moving from long-standing tension spots like parts of Africa or India, Pakistan, towards the Israel-Hamas conflict, and now a heavy focus on Russia and Ukraine.
Domestically, the stated priorities are quite different. Things like increased border enforcement, stopping drug shipments, trying to negotiate trade deals seen as more even, and reducing taxpayer costs.
So you have this stark contrast, and it creates this really intense political discussion, doesn't it?
It really does. And the challenge for many people, I think, is trying to sift through all the noise. Are these protesters genuinely motivated by a belief in policies that, maybe run counter to the administration's focus on stability or fiscal conservatism?
Or is it more about how their views are being shaped by the media they consume or perhaps other influences?
That deep polarization is really the lens we have to use today to understand these events.
Okay, before we dive deeper into the specifics, we do want to mention how we bring this analysis to you. This deep dive is generated by Stylo News, which is an AI-powered news application, and we're supported by ProWave AI.
And our goal today is pretty straightforward. We want to explore these very different viewpoints by looking at the key recent events, understand the impacts, identify who the main decision makers are, and point out what you should probably keep an eye on next.
All right. Let's unpack this domestic situation then. And really, the starting point has to be the administration's action regarding Antifa back in September 2025.
That's right. The official designation of Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. The administration described it as a, quote, militant anarchist network intent on overthrowing the government.
A very strong label.
Extremely strong. And what's quite interesting is the immediate international reaction. It wasn't just a domestic issue.
How so?
Well, it created this ripple effect. Following the U.S. move, the Dutch parliament and also the government in Hungary took steps to classify Antifa similarly.
Okay, so direct mirroring of the U.S. policy.
And beyond that, there's a draft resolution now circulating in the European Parliament. It's backed by, I think, 79 MEPs, that's members of the European Parliament from 20 different countries. They're pushing for an EU-wide classification.
That sounds like significant momentum across the Atlantic. But do security experts universally agree on the threat level implied by that designation?
That's where it gets complicated. Because Europol, which is the EU's main law enforcement agency, actually reports fairly limited documented violent incidents that they can specifically attribute to left-wing extremism.
So a disconnect there.
A definite disconnect. He complicates the narrative that this is some kind of rapidly growing global threat that needs this specific, terror risk label. That split really defines the core of the political debate around this.
Domestically, though, that designation has had very real consequences for law enforcement, right?
Absolutely. We've seen a clear shift. Federal agencies are focusing much more on investigating left-wing extremist violence. That means more arrests, more investigations, particularly in places like Seattle and Portland, cities with a history of Antifa activity.
And are there specific legal cases that illustrate this shift?
Yes, a prominent one relates to that July 4th shooting incident at the Prairieland Detention Center down in Alvarado, Texas.
I remember that.
Two individuals, Autumn Hill and Zachary Yvetz, were arrested. They've now been indicted on terrorism-related charges. And significantly, the prosecution is alleging they were members of an actual Antifa cell. That's the new legal framework in action.
Wow. That kind of federal action must also have a broader effect, maybe a chilling effect.
It certainly seems to. Take the example of Professor Mark Bray at Rutgers University. He wrote a pretty influential book, sort of an Antifa manual. He's actually relocated to Spain now.
Really?
He cited receiving death threats. And that situation really highlights the potential impact on academic freedom and just the general public discourse around the movement itself. It gets harder to discuss openly.
So while the administration is cracking down, they were also facing this huge counter movement last week, the No Kings protests.
Massive scale. The reports suggest over 2,500 rallies took place.
In all 50 states.
In all 50 states, yes,
Yeah.
on October 18th. And the estimated mobilization was around 7 million people.
7 million. That number is staggering. It suggests either incredible grassroots organization or, well, significant coordination.
It's a huge number. And predictably, how those 7 million protesters were described fell along sharply divided political lines.
How did the opposition frame it? People like Senator Sanders or commentators on, say, MSNBC?
They really pushed participation, framing the rallies as absolutely essential democratic resistance. The focus was on constitutional rights, the First Amendment, and pushing back against what they see as rising economic inequality and authoritarian tendencies.
Okay. But you also mentioned some controversy in the commentary.
Yes, some progressive media figures drew these, frankly, highly controversial parallels to Nazi tactics when criticizing anyone questioning the movement or its participants.
Yeah.
That really inflamed rhetoric on both sides.
The response from the administration and GOP leaders like Speaker Johnson.
Equally stark.
Yeah.
They immediately branded the events as Hate America rallies.
Wrong language again.
Very. They explicitly linked the participants to, quote, the pro-Hamas wing, Marxists, and Antifa affiliates, and they specifically questioned where the funding came from.
Raising the issue of outside influence.
Yes, alleging support from what they call dark money NGOs, specifically mentioning the Arabella Advisors Network. Just for context, Arabella Advisors is a major hub for funding various progressive and left-leaning nonprofit groups.
So this national narrative conflict also played out locally, didn't it? I'm thinking of that incident in Chicago.
Right, the anti-ICE protests where Reverend David Black was shot with a pepper bullet by an ICE agent. That caused immediate local backlash, outrage really.
And then the federal response.
It was to claim links between the Reverend and Antifa activity. So you see how a local incident instantly got absorbed into this larger national political battle.
It seems like any flashpoint immediately gets interpreted through this Antifa versus anti-Trump lens.
Precisely. Context gets weaponized almost instantly.
Okay, so while all this was unfolding, domestically millions protesting, these intense political clashes, the administration was also making some very big moves on the world stage. Let's shift focus to foreign policy, because there was a potentially huge diplomatic development this week.
Indeed. Despite all the turmoil at home, President Trump announced that Israel and Hamas had actually agreed on the first phase of a peace plan.
What does that entail?
It involves a pause in the fighting in Gaza and, critically, the release of hostages.
That's significant news. And how was it announced? I heard something interesting about that.
It's quite a scene, actually. The news was apparently delivered to President Trump via a handwritten note.
Handwritten.
Yes, from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And get this, Rubio passed in the note during that White House roundtable discussion about Antifa.
Wow. Talk about multitasking.
It's a remarkable juxtaposition, isn't it? It really underscores the sheer scope of what the administration is juggling, trying to use a foreign policy win, perhaps, to counterbalance some of the intense domestic pressure.
And the timing is notable, too, coming just after the second anniversary of the October 7th attack.
Exactly. And Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu also made statements reaffirming Israel's resilience, but also their commitment to eliminating the threat they perceive from Hamas.
So the Middle East saw diplomacy, a potential carrot, but elsewhere, specifically with Colombia, it felt more like the stick approach was used.
That's a fair way to put it. Tensions definitely spiked after the U.S. conducted a missile strike on a Colombian fishing vessel. The accusation was drug trafficking.
And Colombia's reaction.
President Gustavo Petro condemned it very strongly. He accused the U.S. of violating Colombia's sovereignty and, critically, of killing innocent civilians.
That's a serious charge. It must raise questions about regional cooperation on things like counter-narcotics going forward.
Absolutely. It puts a strain on that relationship and potentially on broader security protocols in Latin America.
Okay, so that's the assertive side. But we also saw the U.S. step in financially in a really big way in South America this week.
Yes, this is where it gets particularly interesting from an economic policy perspective. The U.S. Treasury finalized a massive, truly massive, $20 billion currency swap with Argentina.
$20 billion. Explain what a currency swap like that actually means.
Essentially, the U.S. Treasury is agreeing to temporarily exchange U.S. dollars for Argentine pesos. It's like a huge loan, providing Argentina with dollar liquidity to help stabilize their currency, the peso, which has been under immense pressure.
That sounds unusual. How often does the U.S. Treasury do something like this?
Extremely rare. This is apparently only the fourth time they've taken such an action since 1996.
So why now? Why Argentina?
The timing and target are key. It seems to be a direct move to bolster Argentina's economy right before their parliamentary elections. It's seen as strong support for the current government of President Javier Milei, who's considered an ideological ally of the administration.
So it's strategic political support via economic intervention.
Exactly. It signals perhaps a move towards more unilateral U.S. financial diplomacy stepping in directly where maybe in the past the IMF or World Bank might have played the lead role. It's the U.S. taking on significant political and financial risk to back a specific ally.
And this is happening alongside continued U.S. support for Ukraine, right? There
Yeah.
was talk of more advanced weapons.
Yes, discussions about potentially providing Tomahawk missiles and also enhanced air defense systems are ongoing. It shows the wide scope of U.S. global engagement, both financially and militarily.
And one more global item, trade tensions with China seem to be heating up again.
Dramatically. The U.S. announced brand new 100% tariffs on a range of Chinese goods.
100%.
Yes, set to take effect November 1st. The stated reason is a response to new export controls put in place by China. It definitely signals a significant escalation, a hardening of the trade war.
Okay, that's a lot to take in. Domestic crackdowns, huge protests, peace deals, missile strikes, massive currency swaps, trade wars. Let's try to bring it into focus by looking at the key players and the public sentiment.
We can definitely identify sort of two main camps or paths forward based on the reporting. Driving the Antifa designation and the subsequent crackdown, you have key figures like President Trump himself, Hungarian Prime Minister Orban showing that international alignment, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and Attorney General Pam Bondi.
And what's their proposed course of action broadly?
To formally codify Antifa status, likely through something like the proposed Stop Antifa Act, also to increase federal prosecutions related to protest activities, and they've established that White House task force on civil unrest.
Okay. And who's pushing back against that approach?
Critics include figures like Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, various international human rights observers, and, as we mentioned, Europol questioning the scale of the threat.
And their counterproposal?
Their focus is on protecting civil liberties. They urge caution against what they see as potentially politically motivated designations. The argument is to focus law enforcement on specific, documented violent acts, rather than using broad labels like Antifa that they worry could stifle legitimate protest and free speech.
So, two very different paths. Now, how does this intense polarization look in real time on social media, say, on X?
Well, if you analyze the main hashtags, things like hashtag Trump, hashtag Antifa, hashtag border things, the data is just starkly polarized. There's very little middle ground, very little neutral sentiment.
What about hashtag Trump and hashtag border specifically?
They draw incredibly intense negative reactions, obviously linked to the controversy around enforcement policies. But at the same time, they get really high positive support from conservative users. It's like a perfect mirror image, strong loyalty versus strong opposition.
And the hashtag Antifa hashtag itself, how does that break down?
Deeply divided, as you'd expect. Negative sentiment runs quite high, maybe 55% to 75%, depending on how you measure it. And that negative view strongly links Antifa with violence, often amplified by conservative news outlets.
And the positive view?
Usually sits around 25% to 35%. That positive sentiment frames Antifa as a necessary anti-fascist force. And that view tends to be linked more with progressive sources and commentary.
So the takeaway is echo chambers.
Overwhelmingly. People are amplifying narratives within their own groups online. Finding consensus or common ground in that environment is, well, almost impossible.
Given this rapid pace of events, both here and abroad, what should listeners really be watching for in the near future? What are the key things on the horizon?
Domestically, I'd say watch two legislative tracks. First, the European Parliament vote on the draft Antifa resolution. That's expected maybe late this year, 2025.
Okay.
Second, here in the U.S., keep an eye on the potential passage of that Stop Antifa Act. That could move forward in early 2026.
And any internal political shifts to watch?
Yes. President Trump has very publicly called for the removal of Republican Congressman Thomas Massie. Massie has challenged the administration on a few key issues, including handling of the Jeffrey Epstein case files. So watch how that internal GOP tension plays out.
What about elections? Anything coming up soon that could be telling?
Definitely the gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia, they're happening soon and are seen as really critical bellwethers.
How so?
Their results will give us a read on the current national political mood and could indicate President Trump's level of influence heading towards the 2026 midterm elections.
And shifting globally, what are the key developments?
Two main things. First, the Israel-Hamas peace plan. We need to see if that first phase actually holds and moves towards a finalized, signed agreement. That's crucial.
And second,
The diplomatic fallout from the U.S. missile strike on the Colombian vessel. Watch the negotiations between the U.S. and Colombia. How that resolves will really shape regional cooperation on counter-narcotics moving forward.
all right, that brings us towards the end. And we always like to leave you with a final thought to consider.
Yes, something to mull over, perhaps.
Yeah.
Given this pretty striking transatlantic alignment we're seeing against Antifa, combined with the intense domestic focus here on defining political violence, what might be the long-term consequences
Consequences for what specifically?
for how we define domestic extremism itself? And critically, for how we balance state security needs with the protection of fundamental constitutional rights, like free speech and assembly, across not just the U.S., but many Western democracies.
That's a fundamental tension, isn't it? Security versus liberty.
It is. And it's a debate you're likely to see playing out, probably becoming even more intense in the coming years. It's a big, critical question.
Indeed. Well, that wraps up our analysis for this week.
A lot covered there.
Definitely. And just a reminder, this deep dive, including all the source synthesis and that sentiment analysis we discussed, was created by Stylo News. Stylo News uses a wide range of traditional news sources, plus platforms like X, to bring you this kind of instant global intelligence.
It's a powerful tool for cutting through the noise we talked about earlier.
It is, and
Yeah.
you can get this AI-powered news on demand by subscribing. Just head over to www.stylonews.com. That's STYLONEWS.com to start your subscription today.
Check it out.
All right. Thank you so much for diving deep with us this week. We really appreciate you listening. Be sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms to stay updated.
And we'll talk to you next time.